Well, happy last Monday in March. Thank you all for being here. And hopefully some of you have had a chance to attend one or more of the previous sessions. I think our EVPs did a really great job of talking about what our priorities are, where we stand right now with those, how the next 6 months or so looks relative to major goals, and provided some thoughts even about what the next fiscal year will look like in terms of priorities and how we're proceeding with our planning. Unfortunately, Miss Hollenberger has the flu, so she can't join us today. Some of you saw her on Friday afternoon, and she was looking a bit peaked at that time, and it seems that her symptoms progressed and her condition deteriorated through the weekend. So she sends her best wishes. We all send her best wishes for a rapid recovery. I was just looking at some of the data, in fact, about the flu, and I guess the incidence of influenza B is really high right now, and the vaccine didn't cover that as well as it did A. So anyway, she must have influenza B, and it'll probably take her a few more days to recover, but we'll do our best without her. And if I run into trouble, I'll call on Miss McGrew or Dr. Sharma or Ann O'Connell, and we'll do our best to get through the responses to the questions that you all have. Thought what we do starting off is just hit the high points, the things that I think I heard, and we'll ask Dr. Jacobs and Miss Sadro to weigh in case I missed any of the major points. So let's get into that. We'll go from there. So for Ms. Sadro's presentations, these are the highlights that I recorded. Right now, our finances are tight, no surprise. We have a lot going on. A lot is changing around us. You know, the themes are the ones that we've been talking about for some time. Our ability to produce revenue is not what it used to be. We understand that, and we're adapting to that as we go forward. Our most significant source of revenue is that we produce by providing patient care. And as we go forward, reimbursement per unit of service is forecast to continue to fall. So we have to make sure that we're adjusting for that. We're looking at how we produce efficiencies, how we optimize the return on investment from the revenue that we produce, and we constantly have to work at keeping our expenses in check, again, being as efficient as we can. So we're looking at all of those things. I think everybody who's in this room is pretty much engaged in looking at how we optimize revenues and make ourselves as efficient as possible. And we have some work to do as we go forward. Now, one of the great things that she did was talk about, well, what are some of the major drivers that are out there that are impacting us? She spent some time talking about the Affordable Care Act, about the proposal to replace it, which actually just got pulled back by the House of Representatives on Friday. We're not exactly sure where that all is going to go. There were a number of analyses, I'm sure you all saw them, published over the weekend about the things that the Trump administration could do to change the implementation of the ACA, at least from what had been done in the past. 10 or more things that they could do differently that would affect the insurance market, the eligibility for participants, all kinds of things as we go forward. So clearly we'll be watching that closely. I've gotten some emails from faculty and staff members that want to know what in the world that we are doing in Washington. Why aren't we engaged in these discussions? Well, we are. We're heavily engaged. We're heavily engaged through the different groups that we belong to that either represent us as an educational institution or as a provider of healthcare services. We're engaged through the UT system. We have our own folks who make regular visits in Washington to talk about the healthcare issues as well as the research funding issues. Ms. Sadro also talked about the NIH budget, our success of late in terms of gathering additional NIH funds to come to UTMB. That, of course, could be significantly threatened if the president's budget which calls for a significant reduction in NIH funding, gets put into place. So we are engaged on that front. And on the latter one, which also has been the subject of a number of emails to me, and I know to Dr. Jacobs, we don't think that there's support at all in either House of Congress to make a significant reduction in the NIH budget. The 21st Century for the Cures Act just passed in the prior congressional session. There was broad bipartisan support in both houses for that particular bill, which increased NIH funding. So we think that one's probably DOA, at least in terms of the support for that portion of the president's budget in Congress. But again, we're engaged across all of those fronts and will continue to be as we go forward. Likewise, very much engaged in Austin. In fact, Dr. Raymer is there today. There were apparently significant developments in some of the deliberations regarding the House of Representatives budget over the weekend. A number of those have implications for us in terms of not only funding our formula work, our mission work, but also the work that we do with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So he's there today, and I'll be getting a report from him a little later today about how that's going. So we certainly are engaged in trying to help educate our lawmakers about the impacts of proposed policy, about the impacts of existing policy and its implementation, and we will continue to be as we go forward. That said, there's a lot of others engaged in that work too. And so we're one voice among the many. So we'll do our best to keep the policy in what we think is the right place, but also make sure that we're anticipating potential outcomes and prepared to respond as we move forward. Finally, Ms. Sadro talked about the major priorities for the business and finance areas for the next fiscal year. We have a lot of work that we're trying to do with our human resources group, serving as chief facilitator, in terms of creating staffing strategic plans. Now, the reason that we spend time with that is because it's important to understand, number one, what the marketplace for talent is doing. And you all have heard us talk about the war for talent. We sometimes say the war on talent, and some of our staff think that that's indeed true, but it's really not. We're trying to think about what we need to do to respond to what's happening in the market out there, and that includes things like compensation and benefits, availability of talent, development efforts that institutions take to help their employees increase their skill set or keep it current. So our HR staff is going to be spending a great deal of time working with us to make sure that we have a good plan for moving forward. On the IS front, there's always something with Epic, isn't there? And so, of course, it's like any other piece of software. It's updated, and we need to keep up with those updates. We have some additional implementation plans for new pieces of software. We also are in the process of working through the 2015 upgrade, which is the general operating system upgrade. And I think based on, if I understood what Todd Leach told me, our CIO, not too many people bought the 2016 upgrade, so they've sort of modified it, now made it the 2017 upgrade. Is that right? So I'm close there? Okay, good. And so anyway, we'll be looking at that and understanding what we need to do to keep current as we go forward. As you all know, we have a number of major facilities efforts underway, new construction, considerations for renovations and expansions associated with our mission work in the health system and the academic enterprise. So there's certainly plenty there to keep the plates full for our business and finance folks. So anyway, that's what I took away. A lot of good stuff, a lot of great information. We talked about our finances, where we stand, and I know you're going to talk a little bit more about that as we respond to questions as we go forward. Anything you want to add to the highlights?
No, I think you did a great job.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for doing a great job with the presentation. All right, academic enterprise highlights. A lot of good work there. We have outstanding faculty members across all 4 schools. They're pursuing a number of opportunities. We are spending a lot of time looking at the infrastructure that supports the work of our faculty. And we've made some significant efforts to modernize it, to improve it, to make it more current based on current opportunities that our faculty can and do pursue. And so I think a lot of good work was reported by Dr. Jacobs on that front. Certainly we're working to expand philanthropic support for the work of our faculty. We made some significant strides in gathering some philanthropic funds with the Working Wonders campaign. That effort continues with the Innovations in Mind campaign that we've just gotten underway. And also we're drawing in additional scholarship funds to support our students. Have done a really good job on that front with a lot of good work by our deans. A lot of effort spent trying to improve communication across the academic enterprise. A lot of efforts from Dr. Jacobs and his staff, the deans in the schools, different groups of faculty, our department chairs and faculty leaders. So I think we're making progress on that front. We all know how difficult it is to create effective communication in a place like UTMB. Probably the number one thing that stands in our way is everybody's so darn busy. It's hard for each of us to pause and really pay attention to the communication streams that are coming at us. And those streams are filled with more and more good information every day. So by the end of the day, or whenever we put our phones down before we go to bed at night, we've been overwhelmed. And only so much of that can really register. And at some point, we just want to turn off the switch or need to turn off the switch. And so in that context, working to try to optimize communication, send receivable messages that carry enough information for people to make good decisions. You've done good work on that front, Dr. Jacobs, so thank you very much. He gave a nice report on the AE 2020 work that was begun a number of years ago in 2014, where we stand on that. That continues to be the template for the work in the academic enterprise with feedback generated on a continuing basis. So I've got a lot of good work associated with that planning exercise and its implementation. Finally, Dr. Jacobs delivered a lot of detail with regard to where we stand with the faculty compensation plan. We started that effort a few years ago to try to make compensation more understandable and more predictable based on the work of each of our faculty members. It is very much an iterative process. We learn more every year about the successes and the failures and try to make adjustments that make the faculty compensation plan better. So I know Dr. Jacobs identified some good work there, some good results, and also some needs for some additional attention and additional work, and those are part of the plans moving forward. He showed data about faculty turnover. One of the urban legends that floats around at UTMB and at places like UTMB is that there are high rates of faculty turnover and very poor morale. And that's just not true here. In fact, our faculty turnover rates are about half the national average. We do pretty well on that front. That said, we want to make sure that those turnover rates are appropriate. We also want to look across the institution on a departmental basis or a work unit basis and see where those turnover rates are too high. There are some areas of the institution where they are higher than we think they should be, and so we'll continue to focus attention there and try to get those turnover rates in the right place. I mentioned research funding previously, how well we've done on that front, particularly in gathering additional NIH funds. We're one of the few universities in Texas that can boast that it has markedly increased its NIH funding, and actually one of the few also that has seen any increase in overall research funding over the past few years. So good news on that front. I know we all will continue to work to make sure that those numbers are positive as we go forward in a very challenging environment. So Dr. Jacobs, anything to add to those highlights?
No, well, what I'll add is the other point I think you've been talking about just in your presentation, which is while we're dealing with faculty turnover, there's an equally strong effort to try to address faculty burnout and provide better support for our members. So.
Yeah, a lot of interesting work with regard to burnout for faculty as well as for staff. And again, going back to some of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of how much we all have to do. We're faced by constant change around us in all areas of mission work and in our areas of institutional support. And I think most people who work here feel like every day they come in with a list of priorities. That list is longer than they can actually accomplish. And some of us are engaged on a minute-by-minute basis of changing our priorities. So it makes it very challenging to feel like you're successful at the end of a work day or work week or work month or through the course of the year. So how do we improve our coping skills? That sort of environment is just inherent in what we do. So we have to learn how to manage better. In the past, we put a lot of focus on helping each of us as an individual manage that challenge more effectively. And that's important, but we need to do more work on what are we doing at the institutional level to reduce some of that stress, to enhance our ability to cope as an institution. So I think that's what Dr. Jacobs is referring to. I know the UT system in September is planning, I think, a couple-a-day seminar, a 2-day seminar on this very topic, what's happening across the UT system institutions. It's going to be at MD Anderson, so it's not too far up the road. So I hope that a number of us will be able to participate, lend some of our expertise, and also learn about best practices on that front. So thank you, Dr. Jacobs. Anything else you want to mention?
No, sir.
Okay. For the health system, again, a lot of good things to report in terms of expanding our work, expanding access, expanding quality, tremendous work with the Best Care initiative. Thanks to all who have been involved. Ms. Eilenberger pointed out we still have some work to do, but we've made tremendous progress on that front. And it's not so much that we aren't delivering great care. A lot of this is just in organizing it, documenting what we do, reporting what we do in a way that helps us be recognized for the excellence that's being delivered in terms of patient care. So more work on that front. Dr. Sharma is very much engaged in that. Ms. McGrew, all the health system leadership team, Dr. Marshall, and we'll continue to go forward, Dr. Ojo and TDCJ. So we appreciate all that work, and we're all engaged in this together. Ms. Eilenberg did that really nice presentation that talked about the 6 degrees of relationship, how we all really are involved in delivering best care. I thought that was very effective and very nice. Bottom line, teamwork is necessary to be successful. Certainly in the health system that's true. Everybody needs to be engaged in helping us keep our best foot forward, thinking about what is the experience of the patient, what are the experiences of their family members or supporters, and how do we do everything we can to give them as successful an outcome in terms of their health, the impact of their health condition on their daily existence, provide them support as they move through an acute episode of care into something that may take a little bit longer to generate a recovery or perhaps a change in approach, a change in their existence. So we're doing well on that front, but we have more work to do focused on our patients and how we help them cope with the health challenges that they face. So a good report there. Ms. McGrew, Dr. Sharma, any things that I should specifically mention? I think we outlined our priorities, what we want to do going forward, so I thought Ms. Eilenberger did a great job, as usual. Okay. So coming back to that last point about teamwork, you know, we understand that's necessary. We want to spend more time thinking about how we work more effectively together. We think about what is happening in education. You know, we talk a lot about interprofessional education, the teamwork that is necessary, teaching the teamwork that is necessary to create that success for patients, how we do that. How do we collaborate more effectively across the schools to deliver a higher quality of interprofessional education? So we'll be thinking about that as we work through our educational strategic plan taking some of those concepts that were developed with AE 2020 and extending those out into greater detail to map our progress or map our process forward with education. Same thing with research. We've made some great strides in terms of generating additional research funding, but we need to work closer together to understand how we can be more competitive for the different forms of research funding that are out there. We need to plan to be more aggressive and more competitive as we go forward. So we certainly will work to do that. Obviously, teamwork is very necessary in patient care. We need to think broadly about how we pursue the opportunities that are out there, how we prioritize those, how we go after those, and how we make good decisions about what we do going forward. So we spend a lot of time planning. Sometimes we're a little critical. Some of us are a little critical of the particular efforts to plan, but we believe that planning to work together effectively is very important. We've generated success because we've taken that time to help us think about the opportunities that are before us, make good decisions about them, and pursue them aggressively. We want to continue to do that and be better at that as we move forward. So let me stop right there. We're going to go ahead and move into some of the questions that have been submitted through the portal that we had out on the web. I'm going to direct those to the EVPs, and when we get through those, we'll open it up to the floor for questions. So let me start with the first one and direct it first to Ms. Sadro. And by the way, we appreciate the questions. You know, thinking about teamwork. If we don't stop and ask questions, why did we do that? What in the world are we thinking? Did we take every perspective into account to generate a good solution to a complex problem? We're not going to be as successful as we can be. So we appreciate the questions. We'll do our best to answer them, and we encourage everybody to continue to challenge us and each other as we try to choose the best paths forward. So here's the first question. The recent reorganization in business and finance caused job loss for many people of immense talent, dedication, and diligence. UTMB wants to retain the best and the brightest. The university says there are no layoffs, but, quote, reorganizes, unquote, people out, causing those remaining to question their loyalty to UTMB and to fear what may come next, or to leave proactively in search of a true career home. What steps are leaders taking to improve retention of the best and most hardworking and to respect their most valuable resource, their employees?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I thought about this answer because it's a very important question and it requires a very respectful answer. So I'm going to read a little bit of what I've prepared, but I also invite your feedback. So let me start answering this by saying that anytime an employee is involved and someone loses their job, we all take that very, very seriously. And while you couldn't be, the deliberations that went on about this process were very long and very given a great deal of consideration. So we did undergo a programmatic change, and that is different than a layoff. We've all seen what's happened in the healthcare industry lately, particularly most recently our brethren up in Houston, MD Anderson. That was a layoff. That was caused by a very important event. What we chose to do in business and finance was take a look at where we stood from an industry perspective related to our processes, related to how we used information services, and so forth. That's just doing what's right for the organization. We wanted to make sure that we were looking as hard at business and finance as we were any other part of our organization. So we brought in some industry experts to help us do that. We hadn't done that in business and finance in many, many years. In order to make sure that we took a look at all of the responses that the industry experts gave us. We looked at their recommendations and we decided how we might go about implementing some of the recommendations. Some of those recommendations involved aligning the current job functions with job descriptions that people had in place prior to this initiative. We looked again at more effective and efficient processes. We hope to use IT systems to the highest and best use. We weren't doing that in previous years in business and finance, and just many, many more processes that we wanted to look at. When we look at when we take the time to look at such processes in such an in-depth manner, we do realize that there are changes that need to be made, and unfortunately, sometimes those changes involve individuals. And again, I can tell you that the diligence, and I will use the word compassion, that went into those decisions was absolutely exceptional. We insisted on making that transition for those that were affected as respectful and as smooth as possible. And individuals that were effective were fairly compensated for the remainder of the fiscal year, and we worked really hard to find open positions at UTMB. We also offered those individuals that were interested career placement counseling, and several individuals took advantage of that. In the question that Dr. Callender just asked, there's a specific piece of that question that says, what steps are leaders taking to improve our retention of the best and brightest and most hardworking, and to respect the most valuable resource, our employees? So let me give you a few thoughts around that as well. We do many things. On an annual basis, you may or may not know, Human Resources looks at compensation because we believe that in order to retain the best and brightest, we actually need to understand what our competitors, those can be many different forms, are paying our folks. So we look at compensation on an annual basis and make sure that we're in line with those competitive forces. We do a tremendous amount of employee training. We want everybody to have the opportunity to excel in their career and to advance as they see fit. So we do a lot in terms of foundational management training, our enterprise learning management system, physician leadership accounting, don't we wish? They don't wish, do they? Physician Leadership Academy. So we do many types of training programs to give individuals the opportunity to better themselves in that manner. And finally, we do what we did in terms of our assessment. It's not easy to look inward at yourself and say, are there things that we should be doing that we're not doing, or are there things that we should be doing better that we're not doing? But in order to keep the best and the brightest, and in order to do what we should be doing for UTMB, it's only right that we do those types of assessments on a periodic basis, 5-10 years. It's produced a lot of great opportunities for us to do our work better in business and finance. It wasn't easy, it was extremely hard. But we did that so that we could continue the mission of UTMB, which is what we're all here to do. I will be happy to take any questions from that.
Let me see if Dr. Jacobs has any additional thoughts about that. This particular reorganization really was aimed at business and finance and was generated by external forces. Our governance group, the Board of Regents, wanting to make sure that we are not only average, but really in the upper percentiles relative to our support cost. It's driven on an ongoing basis by improvements in technology, the disruptive nature of that. But there's also really the issue of faculty programs and their ability to generate revenue, income in terms of grant support and the like, and us having the responsibility to those programs to optimizing our support costs. And so that's certainly an ongoing challenge within the academic enterprise, but across the institution. How are you doing that? And what are your thoughts about this question? What are the best responses?
Well, I think I agree with everything that Cheryl mentioned. The way I would frame it is, we talked about the importance of retaining faculty members, but that retention is in the context of available duties and things that we have where there's an opportunity to improve effectiveness or efficiency, to counsel others and talk about other things they might do that are of value for the academic medical center. To me, it comes down to, well, I mentioned it in my Mondays in March, and there are pushes and there are pulls. And so from where I sit, it's the push that worries me. Faculty members, other folks in the academic enterprise who feel like there isn't a role or a place for me at an institution, given the context that's provided by a road ahead. There are always going to be people that are pulled, and in the academic side of the street, we want folks to go on and assume leadership positions. That's part of our legacy. So I think, although our numbers for turnover are very, very good, maybe even better than some literature reports, I still think that if there's a person who feels like there isn't a role for them in the institution, we need to ask the question, what can we do? What can we do better? I call it the total value proposition. So in academic medicine, we want to make sure that people get a fair wage for a fair amount of work. We also want to make sure that the conditions under which they work are also optimal. But at the same time, when you look at the pull, say, in the private sector, we have to think about more than just compensation. So I tried to capture that in the very last part of my presentation, which is making sure people know that we are here for a higher calling. I don't mean to be sort of Pollyannish or preachy there, but we really are important for the future of healthcare in the state and in the country. So to me, that means what are the other things of value besides compensation that will enhance or increase the likelihood of retaining someone? We need to ask those questions every day. I mentioned the issue around burnout, and that's another important opportunity for us in terms of creating that environment that's positive. But since I've been here 4.5 years or so, we've asked that question regularly as regards administration, the provost's office, which is, are we optimally configured so as to provide the very best service to our members, where I jokingly say sometimes that we're not just a police function in the provost's office, our charge is also to provide service to the members. And so we work very hard to make sure our members know who can provide those services. Now, to Dr. Callender's point, when I think about the challenges ahead of us, there's only 4 ways, maybe 3 ways I can think about us continuing to be successful. One is the efficiency, effectiveness piece that Ms. Cedro talks about. The other is relates to our partnerships with the health system, but throughout the institution, where we look to enhance revenue. Think of the cost in the academic enterprise as an investment in our future. But there's efficiency, there's effectiveness, there's opportunity to be laser focused on increasing revenue. That's part of the best care plan. That's part of our clinical strategic plan. And then I think the other piece that Dr. Callender also summarized is the importance of philanthropy. In my career in academic medicine, I've never been at an institution that had a positive bottom line for the academic enterprise. I've also had the pleasure of serving as a consultant at various organizations around the country, and the same thing is true. So barring philanthropy, it's very challenging to get to a positive bottom line. Maybe more about that later. But by focusing or continuing to focus on our efforts to raise funds, then I think that also is an important opportunity for us to make sure we have sufficient funds to do everything that we need to do. The fourth comment I would make is that if all of those things fail, we've been talking about this since I've been here, if all of those initiatives fail and we don't bend the cost curve, then I think we engage with you all to say, well, what are those things that are critically important for us to do now, and what should we reprioritize, what must we reprioritize in order to achieve all the things we think are important, whatever time horizon we look over, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years.
Okay, thank you. So then, summarizing, number one, we do everything we can to avoid across-the-board layoffs, which is what you were referring to. We saw Memorial Hermann do some of that. We just saw MD Anderson do that. CHI's done that. And that typically is a sign that there is an emergent situation.
Correct.
That the financial situation is such that emergency measures are required, and the most flexible piece for a lot of big health systems in particular is labor costs.
That's right.
And so that's why we see that sort of response. Our approach has been that we want to avoid those sorts of emergency situations. We want to have scenarios that are apparent to us where we can take actions before we get to across-the-board layoff. We can't guarantee that.
Right.
If we had a big storm, that might be the case.
That's true.
If we had a major reduction in state funding, that might be the case. But in general, we don't want to do across-the-board layoffs. We think when you're in that situation, you're in an emergency, and we want to avoid that as much as we can. We are living in an era of constant and accelerating change, and Dr. Jacobs' comments were really to that point. Technology is disruptive. There are constant changes around us in terms of revenue streams that are available, thoughts about efficiency change and the like, and so change is just a part of what we do. To the extent we can, we will manage so that we avoid situations where those changes cause us to change programs and shed people. That said, some of that we believe will continue to occur. Our response then is on the employee front and investing more in development efforts as we go forward to provide our people with more flexible skill sets, the ability to move between jobs as we move forward, going back to this concept of team, creating flexibility so that people move among work teams, and hopefully over the course of time, as one set of needs goes away, others emerge, people have broader skill sets, and they move around in response to changes in work across the institution. We, as much as we can, are moving away from people with solo skill sets being applied to one set of job needs because it doesn't serve the institution well and because it makes them vulnerable over the course of time. But we're still in a bit of transition on that front. It's going to take more time and more investment to get there. But hopefully as we do, we'll move away or we'll lessen the risk of reorganizations causing us to shed people.
Yes, definitely. Well
Okay?
said.
So that's where we are today. Thank you for that question. We understand that reorganizations are tough. We think they will be part of our future as we move forward because of this time of change in which we live in. But to the extent we can, we're trying to prepare so we don't find ourselves in that situation where we have to shed people when it comes time to change our programs. All right, so let's move on to another question. One of to me, the most provocative slide in all of the presentations was your 6-year forecast that you showed.
Oh, wow.
And I think that was really misunderstood because it showed losses and progressive losses, increasing losses over the next 6 years. And your point, I think, was to say, this is the best example I can give you that things need to change.
Yes.
If we continue to do what we're doing now, we just dig a huge financial hole for ourselves.
Yes.
That reduces our ability to invest, reduces our flexibility, and really makes us unable to accomplish much of our mission work. So we don't plan for this to be the outcome. It just shows us that we need to change our plans, change the way we manage as we go forward so we avoid those sorts of problems. But I think a lot of folks looked at that and just sort of shut down and said, oh my gosh, what's going on? And here come the layoffs and here come all the other negative things.
Sure.
So there was a specific question about that. Is that really what we anticipate in terms of an outcome? And then there were some additional questions, Dr. Jacobs, and you started to address these earlier. Well, then the academic enterprise seems to be driving much of that. So what in the world are we doing about that to mitigate some of those risks, to eliminate those deficits? How do we manage this going forward? So let me start with you, since you showed the slide, and give us the thinking behind the slide, what you're really trying to get across, and then ask Dr. Jacobs to expand on some of his thoughts from earlier about the academic enterprise, the deficits, and what we're doing to manage those.
Thank you. So it was meant to be provocative in a good way. Most of what you saw on that slide was based on our current performance, which we have been improving very nicely. And Dr. Callender has talked about that long before I got here, that we would see these years when we saw a dip because we have a lot of construction that's gone on, depreciation, and so forth. we took the slides with information that we knew at that point in time about what the legislature was looking at. And we said, this is kind of a middle-of-the-road, worst-case scenario that we might see should the legislature continue down that path. And as Dr. Callender said, things changed over the weekend, and certainly things have changed since that presentation on the first Monday in March. We are looking at fewer reductions from the Senate side, far fewer than we anticipated, as well as the House, and we still have a long way to go in terms of them bringing those two budgets together. But I think, right, wrong, or indifferent, I think the legislature is asking all entities to really look at how they do things and make sure that we are operating, and we keep saying these two words, as effectively and efficiently as we can. If I did those slides today, those numbers would probably change, but they wouldn't change so drastically that the message would be different. I would still say to us that we really do need to look at everything we do. Are we duplicating things in certain areas? Do we have the right processes? Are we using technology like we should? Are we doing, as Dr. Jacobs mentioned, are we looking at our priorities and making sure we're focusing on those priorities and not trying to be everything to everyone? I don't think those will be our results. We've challenged ourselves to stay at a certain level that we talked to UT System about many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I believe we'll get there. But if we stayed on the course that we are today, and if we absorb those really large legislative hits, then we might be in those positions, which is just not where we want to be. We're much better than that. We can fix that ourselves. So yes, it was meant to be provocative. I'm glad it had a little bit of that impact, but it also needs to be simply a message that says, how do we fix this? How do we turn it into a different direction? Because we have that capability.
Very good. Dr. Jacobs, you talked about the fact that it's very difficult within the academic enterprise to generate a positive margin. Some places, depending on their payer mix, may be able to offset the majority of their losses with academic mission work with patient revenue. Our patient mix doesn't really allow us to do that. Mm-hmm. So how do we best manage those deficits? What are we thinking about that? I know some of our faculty leaders have said, well, how in the world are we going to make investments? How do we have a flexibility in funding so we can make changes in programs and pursue the greatest opportunities? So how do you put that together? And then what do you see us doing as an executive leadership team engaged with our faculty leaders to make the best choices?
Yes, maybe I'll start there. I mean, I think it still is about engagement. And so we've worked very hard under your leadership to make sure we are ever more engaged with everyone across the academic medical center so we can have the kind of conversations to address Ms. Sadrill's comments about how can we be more effective and how can we work more efficiently. But I take to heart the comment about the projections, and again, apologies to any financial experts, including Ms. Sadrill, but to me it is important to recognize that it is subject to change. It's one of the most important purposes from my perspective is to show where we may end up barring intervention. And then it's an estimate based on an assessment of our current needs in terms of anticipated or current sources of revenue balanced against what investments we think we have to make. So the punchline for me is we can intervene and we must intervene. And so to your point about the root causes in academia, if you look at the traditional mission-based management approach, look at each fundamental mission, look at all investments in that particular mission area, look at all revenue available in that area, and if you look at education, it runs the deficit at every place I've seen and every place I know. Same thing is true for research, where there are investments that are associated with a vibrant, strong research enterprise. So that means that in order for us to be successful, the punchline is the Best Care Initiative and our clinical strategic plan. If you look at the effect that the academic enterprise has across all the schools, but certainly as relates to the clinical mission, the School of Medicine and elsewhere, that is a significant multiplier effect. So the better our health system colleagues do, the more dollars we'll have available to invest in those things that are critically important for us. So if you look at some of the numbers, I pulled them. If you look at, just pull out the School of Medicine, for example, the average percent effort for a faculty member in patient services is approximately 65%. So that means there's another 35% of that person's activity that's related to activities in education or research or even in vitally important administrative duties. It is that balance that's critically important. So I think it's a doable challenge. I'll reference that it's not the first time we've had this kind of challenge in the academic enterprise. We had targets in FY16, which we're able to meet while still investing. And so far, knock on wood, through FY17, again, having to take millions of dollars out of the budget or find them in revenue, we've been able to do that through this year. So FY18, although I'm certainly sensitive to fatigue that you mentioned, Dr. Callender, we have so many things we're doing so many things we have to do. But if you look at the last 2 years, certainly the last year and a half, I think if we don't get tired, as I say in my Mondays in March presentation, we can certainly achieve what's in front of us. There is a great white paper that's available on the internet. The AAMC put out something several years ago, which they called the Endurance Project. And they got a bunch of experts together, presidents, chief financial officers, deans, people from industry, and asked the question, what do academic medical centers need to do to prepare for the future? And if you pull that report, and there are summaries available, I find it reassuring that many of the things that were outlined in that report are things that we're doing now. Quickly, we've talked about efficiency and effectiveness, and as Dr. Callender said, we absolutely have to prepare to do more with less in the foreseeable future. We have to identify cost savings wherever there's an opportunity. You've heard about that. We have to increase revenue wherever possible, and then, over the short term at least, focus our investments on those things that will have the greatest effect. Not just money now. I want to emphasize it's qualitative and quantitative returns, but we need to ask that question. Certainly in the academic enterprise, it's not just about money. And then we have to aggressively continue to support the efforts of our development officers. And the fourth leg of the stool is prioritize where necessary to make sure that we're doing those things that are vibrant and important for an academic medical center. But the summary, I would say, is efficiency, effectiveness, sort of a broken wheel. There's ample opportunity to do that in the academic enterprise. We've done it over the past several years. I think we will continue to do it. But if I had to pick one thing that's critically important, it's about patient services and our relationship with our health system colleagues over the next several years.
Very good. Okay, thank you. There's a couple of quick ones here that I think are very important to respond to. Number one, here's one, and I asked Ms. Sadro to address this initially. Looking at my salary range, education experience, I don't think my pay is consistent with my colleagues in the same position who have similar credentials. How can I request a review to see if an equity adjustment is in order?
Sure, great question. There's a very easy process there. You do need to, if this is an individual that has a direct supervisor, you do need to contact that direct supervisor. They'll decide whether or not they feel that that's appropriate to look at an equity review. And then Human Resources does this type of work all the time. They will look at the position, they will look at the duties assigned to the position, and there are many, many market surveys, studies that will be used to price a particular position. So it's an easy process. Well, it's not easy, but it is a process that's available to everyone. And if you feel like you're in that position, or folks that work for you feel like they're in that position, we encourage you to contact Ron, and he can set you up with an analysis.
Very good. Dr. Jacobs?
Same thing. I mean, I think the first step is to make sure the person who has concerns reaches out to his or her direct supervisor. And certainly if there's an issue about equity and other fairness things, that deserves and merits appropriate attention. In the Provost's office, we review these kinds of things regularly just to try to make sure we stay ahead in partnership with Dr. McKinley and his office. But anytime anyone has a concern, please bring it to our attention. Mr. Skinner is here in the audience, and he helps to coordinate that. The other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned was the faculty compensation plan. Based in no small part on comments we heard from faculty members, we actually codified an expectation in the faculty compensation plan that says before the beginning of any upcoming academic year, we actually look at market competitiveness of our salaries and make whatever adjustments are necessary, informed by what dollars we have available. That was summarized in the slide I showed in my Mondays in March. So that's not equity, that's market competitiveness. So if there's an equity concern, or perhaps even a concern that falls to performance of duties outside of gender or ethnicity or concerns like that, please bring it to our attention.
Absolutely. We spent a lot of time looking at the compensation market, where we stand, making sure that our policies and procedures are consistent with our philosophy. We put compensation up there at the top of the list of priorities. One of the challenges that we have, and some of our employees have relayed their concerns along these lines, is that different classes of workers move at different rates depending on what's happening in the market. Used to be, now this is my recollection, it may not be accurate, but we used to move everybody sort of in sync because labor markets weren't as complicated.
Right.
And so we would say, well, this year it looks like there's a 2.5%, 3.5%, 4% change in the overall market, and we're just going to move everybody along. The markets don't work that way anymore. And we see even within nursing, different groups moving at different rates depending on the demand for that skill set, market conditions, what's going on with health systems and the like. And we feel we need to respond, but when we do, some of our folks think that we're being unfair.
Right.
And so we're trying to respond by being more transparent, explaining the reasons for what we do, looking at the market several times a year, and making adjustments with different groups independent of what's happening with the others. But please, if you have any concerns and you don't feel they're being adequately addressed locally, or you're afraid to ask the question, let Dr. McKinley know, let Dr. Jacobs, Ms. Sollenberger, Ms. Sadro know, let me know, and we'll do our best to respond to you in a way that protects you to the extent we can, so that you don't, there's no pressure put on you, inappropriate pressure for asking the question. It's important to know where you stand. Yes, sir.
On that point, one of the reasons why you allowed us to hire 2 ombuds people, at least an ombuds person for the faculty, is so that there's another resource available for faculty members to bring these kind of concerns. And Dr. Cooper has fielded a lot of those concerns, and I think we've been able to move forward in a manner that protects the interests of the faculty while addressing these fundamental issues like fairness.
Very good. There's one other that I want to get to here, and this actually was going to be opposed to Ms. Sollenberger, but let me just take it with some help from Ms. McGrew and Ms. O'Connell. I am an employee as well as a patient of UTMB. I want to be able to proudly refer my family and friends to UTMB for their health care needs. My concern is clinic appointment wait times. Multiple family members and I have experienced 2-month or longer wait times for a specialty clinic appointment. I don't want to change providers, but I think I have to go elsewhere. What is UTMB doing to reduce long wait times for appointments at specialty clinics? So let me just read a couple of responses that were provided to me, and then we'll go from there. So in the past year, there has been significant work to improve access across all our clinics, with a special focus on access for new patients being able to see a primary care provider within 3 days, access for new patients to see an orthopedic surgeon of 7 days, and the ability to see a cardiologist within 8 days. Our ultimate goal is to provide access to specialty care for new patient appointments from 7 to 14 days. What we have found is that we need to be more proactive at messaging this improvement internally, so employees know that it is now much easier to make an appointment in most or all of our primary and specialty clinics. So the way I read that is we're making progress on that front. Ms. McGrew was helpful. Thank you very much, Deb, for letting me have that information. And Ann O'Connell went on to say that we encourage all employees to call our Employee Access to Care line, 409-772-CARE. Now, those letters may not be on your cell phone. So that is 772-2273. And I know this is being recorded. It'll be out there on the web. If you need an appointment to a primary specialty care clinic. You also can call a clinic directly. If you do, please identify yourself as a UTMB employee, and the people who are making the appointments will do everything they can to get your appointment time as quickly as possible. And if for any reason we offer you an appointment that does not meet your needs or is not suitable for your personal or work life, please let us know and we will work to find a better appointment time. Each clinic has an escalation process for any employee or patient who needs a sooner appointment. So I just wanted to put that out there. Ann and Deb, thank you so much for helping me with that response. We do have a way for employees, several ways for employees to get appointment times as quickly as possible, and an escalation process if you're not satisfied with the results. So please use that. In the meantime, the health system is working diligently with the faculty group practice to improve our wait times to appointments for both initial appointments as well as follow-up appointments. But again, if you have any concerns at all, we will do our best to make you happy to get you an appointment as soon as we can. So please use those numbers, the 22-CARE line, or the 2-CARE line, 22273, or just place a call directly to the clinic where you're seeking an appointment. Let them know you're a UTMB employee, and we'll go from there. So I think that's all the time we have for questions, or all the time I want to devote to the questions that were submitted. Does anybody have a quick one from the audience, a follow-up maybe to one of the ones that we addressed here? Something that needs clarification? All right, well, thank you all so much. In closing, I just want to say, you know, we, the three of us who are here, and including Ms. Sollenberger, the four of us, really understand that everybody's working really, really, really hard. And we are most appreciative for that. We try to say thank you as much as we can. We're living in very challenging times, but we have a lot of smart people who work here. And not just faculty members, staff members, our leaders from all across the institution. We have an incredible capacity to think through challenges and come up with new approaches, novel approaches, innovations that help us move forward. And I see that happening here every day. So I just want to say thank you. I think we have an amazing capacity to deal with all the challenges and changes that are occurring around us. We will get through this. It won't be easy. It's not easy for any institution like us in the country right now. But we're actually doing well overall. And I think the EVPs did a great job in pointing out the successes, which actually outnumber the failures by far here. Some failure is good. It helps us understand how to get better and move forward. So we're not trying to avoid failure. What we really want to do, though, is to talk about the challenges that are before us, engage them aggressively, come up with approaches, and move forward, even when it means that we individually have to change the way we do things. As a learning institution, we know how to do that better than any other group of institutions in the country. So let's continue to harness that ability to innovate, to take on challenge, to confront change, and move forward to generate great success. Thank you for the work to do that so far. Let's keep it up as we go forward. I know we can be successful. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
UTMB Health, working together to work wonders.